it's just hard to imagine something that is as crazy as we're in right now. Unfortunately, it's not just silly, ha-ha crazy, but, I think we're getting closer to existential threat kind of craziness.
Welcome back to Pacific Time, where we ask the big what-if questions about the West Coast and the wild, wobbly country we're still technically part of. I'm your host, Greg Emmerfell, and today we're talking about satire, sovereignty, and the cartoonist's moral compass. My guest is Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist Mark Fiore. He's been skewering people in power for decades and joins us fresh from a fellowship at Stanford where he's exploring disinformation and misinformation as well as what AI means for the future of satire. Before he started bringing home trophies, Mark was a freelance cartoonist hustling to get his stuff published in Bay Area newspapers. He was also my roommate in a cool old Victorian in San Francisco's Mission District. Thinking back, I may have shown more interest in his fresh-baked biscuits than in his work as a cartoonist. Although one time, Mark showed me a trick of his trade, how to illustrate aging. To draw a baby's face, he'd draw an oval for the head and put eyes about 2/3 of the way down the face, a curl of hair at the top. A grown-up's eyes would move up the face with grown-up hairdos to match. And then, mimicking the cycle of life, an older person's eyes would drop back down the face, about the same as a baby's, and a few lines in the forehead would represent wrinkles. A baby and an older person are essentially the same through the hands of a cartoonist. How apropos today. And this cartoon lesson came back to mind because when it comes to satire, what's old is new again. And what used to seem like mature political discourse has become outright juvenile when it's presided over by people who seem to be forgetting that their first job is to protect the U.S. Constitution. Mark has been portraying political cycles and movements for over 30 years and has a keen perspective on the natural evolution of both politics and culture. He knows what stands out as an anomaly. He also knows the difference between when to tease and poke fun and when to hold back, wielding all of the tools of satire. So what happens when our political system is so absurd that cartoonists struggle to keep up? Mark and I caught up, as old friends do, and then I dove in by asking him what it's like to draw truth in a time when truth itself feels endangered. I started by asking Mark if this moment is the golden age or death spiral of political satire. Let's find out.
It seems like this is, well, I shouldn't say seems, it is the craziest that I've ever witnessed. I mean, I think, I'm not alone in saying that, but it's as far as what is going on and what is ripe for satire and what can be satirized, this is the craziest I have ever seen. I remember when I was a lot younger getting into political cartooning and journalism, thinking almost wistfully like, oh man, I missed it. Like I wish I could have been alive during Nixon and the whole Watergate thing. Like what amazing fodder for cartoonists. And here I am. And it's just hard to imagine something that is as crazy as we're in right now. And it's, unfortunately, it's not just silly, ha-ha crazy, but, I think we're getting closer to existential threat kind of craziness. Just true damage to the republic, if I can sound a little higher and mightier on that front. It's nuts. So it's a great time to be a satirist, and it's a great time to be commenting, and it's a necessary time to be commenting. I say this in conversations like this where, yes, you have a lot of material, but that doesn't mean you can necessarily turn it into a thriving business. So there's always the business side of this kind of work and the content side. There's so much that you could say and so much that you could do. It's just a matter of getting it out there and being able to look at this as a long game. That's really what I've done and tried to do my whole career, is really look at this as a long game.
We're living in a time where satire seems almost redundant. Like reality can be stranger than fiction or cartoons. How do you navigate that?
It's been difficult ever since the dawn of Trump, since 2015.
I see that pun. I hear you.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible. I think it was 2015. It was when when Trump was running the first go around. I think I did, he said something ridiculous, and I did a cartoon about, this, have we reached peak satire? And I basically said, yes, we have, and what could be more crazy and absurd than this? And it's just, I was so wrong. It's like, and I feel like, what I've learned now is there is no peak satire. I think you can always satirize something. You can always make fun. It just depends on, is that going to land you in a camp or not? That's in a more serious vein. But luckily, we're not there yet, and God forbid we get there. But yeah, I don't think we've hit peak satire, and I think it is more difficult because it's already so ridiculous, and we're watching the buffoons in the Trump administration do everything from, wrecking the country in various ways to just doing really stupid mistakes. It's like, on the one hand, you think of them as this juggernaut coming for the country and like doing crazy things, or at least that's how I think of them. But on the other, you see them just do stupid things, like, whether it's, Pete Hegseth's, signal chats, or whatever it is, something, the latest thing that JD Vance did or said, these are not the sharpest tools in the shed, but unfortunately they've gotten the controls and, levers of power. So that's what we have to face. So it's a gift. It's a bittersweet gift for cartoonists everywhere.
Of course, buffoonery does not have political loyalties. Do you spot people working against Trump who are guilty of buffoonery as well?
Oh, oh my God, yeah. And I have practiced that art or that skill of finding that, back in the era of Obama. It's like, now I think of Obama, and I liked Obama, and I still do, but there was plenty to criticize about him. I mean, I went after him hard on his whole drone program, and and some of the work that he had done. It's like, yes, he's an amazing politician, and God, compared to Trump, he's amazing. But yeah, there's always room. I mean, Chuck Schumer's like wimpy old school Democrat speak just drives me up the wall. It's like, we're going to write a strongly worded letter and that'll teach them. So yeah, there's plenty of buffoonery, but you do have to be careful of both sidesism on that front. It's like, yes, they're buffoons on the left side of the aisle, but they're not the ones who are, deporting U.S. citizens with cancer. It's a different scale.
One side is dismantling democracy, and one side seems not to be into that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. They're not into that.
You mentioned the strongly written letter. What have you learned about political cartoons and what they can do versus essays, podcasts, speeches?
I mean, I'm obviously biased just because that's kind of my art and craft that I've been involved in, and I've been drawn to my whole career. But I think there's something about visual journalism and visual commentary that it's almost like you have an unfair advantage, because people respond to visuals in a much more visceral, immediate way than they do to, say, a long gray column of text in an editorial or something. Yeah, you can write the best written editorial or column can be really powerful, but still, it's like, I would rather have the ability to take that, condense it, distill it into something that's just like a quick punch, with whether it's a single panel cartoon or an animation that taps into other aspects. I mean, that's one of the ways I got into creating animation, was that compared to single panel cartoons, which I still really love and I still create those, animation, I feel you have more tools in your toolbox to reach in and touch people's brains and touch their emotion through through visual, through character, but also through audio, through music, through what that character sounds like, through what the narrator sounds like. It just feels, again, it's a little bit of an unfair advantage, but it's the world that I have definitely been attracted to, and have been able to really say some things, and keep saying things. But I mean, no offense against podcasting. It's like, podcasts can be great and amazing, but it's a different way to use your skills.
Mark, how do you decide when something deserves teasing, satire, ridicule, or full-blown cartoon destruction?
That's a great question, because you hit on that, because it really is a continuum in that way. Like some, you want to do like a light jab, or some things can be just silly and stupid. Like compare like I mentioned, the Pete Hegseth signal thing. It's like that's important, and it's funny, and it's embarrassing. So it's, to me, that would be like, you're an idiot. But then you get over to the edge, to the other end, where it's like, oh wait, you put a baby on a plane that had, cancer, or, I guess that was a 4-year-old, so not quite a baby, but, there were 2-year-olds too. So it's like you stuck a baby on a plane that was a U.S. citizen, deported it, which really you can't deport a citizen, because it's reserved for people that are here illegally. It's like, no, that is expulsion or banishment or whatever you want to call it. So that kind of stuff, I mean, you can hear it in my voice. Like I get more worked up and pissed off about that. And so I don't know whether you call it the pissed off-o-meter or what, but you go from the Hegseth side, where you're like, oh, you're an idiot, let's poke fun at you, to the, you guys are freaking evil, and you are not only doing terrible policies, but have you no shame, that kind of thing.
So it sounds like the piss off meter might also be called a moral compass.
Yeah, good way to look at it. Yeah, it's true. It's it's something that you feel viscerally. It's like, how enraged are you, or how much do you think that you would just cringe if you were in a conversation with these people? Like how much can you hide your fury? Like, I don't know. I've never really thought of it that way, but okay, Pete Hegseth walks into the room, like, I mean, it would be a little cringy for a variety of reasons, but specifically for the signal chat reason, it's like, yeah, you might be like, hey, don't touch my phone, buddy, or whatever. But if someone came in, if Stephen Miller came in, fresh off the tarmac from loading the kids, I don't know what I'd do. It's that range like that. But that's a very good catch on your part, that it is that there is a range. It's not just an on and off switch, for this kind of work. It's like you want to be able to moderate it. Like sometimes I feel like there's, on the visual side, for me anyway, you go more New Yorker style, where it's a little more of finesse. It's a little more of a, clever chortle, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, exactly. Like that. So you could go that route, or something, versus something that's a little more, I mean, I try not to go ham-fisted.
Who's your favorite person to caricature right now?
Oh, gee, actually maybe my favorite is Stephen Miller. My favorite one that pops in my head recently, I mean, obviously Trump is a gift to caricaturists, but it's like almost too easy. But Stephen Miller, there's something about him. Like if you look at him, no offense to the follically challenged, but it's like that helps. But he also has this, like, he has like a 5 o'clock shadow everywhere. It's like there's something there, and just his eyes, there's just this, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to look at him and not picture the, the smarminess and the evil. So, but he's kind of fun to draw, like his little, almost peanut head, but he's got a square jaw, or relatively square jaw, but it's sunken, and he's got like the lips. So he's one of my favorites right now.
Stephen Miller, product of Santa Monica, California, architecting our decline into dictatorship.
That's right. One of the angry student government kids who's just like been ranting his whole life and railing against them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark, tell me about what you've been doing at Stanford over the last year.
At Stanford, I've been lucky enough over the past year to, I've been doing a John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship down there, which is essentially, it's a fellowship program that's been going for, I don't know, 50, 60 years or something like that. It's basically a chance to focus on a particular problem or issue in journalism and really do a deep dive and study it and figure out ways that you could make a difference, and, make a difference in your own career, but also in journalism more broadly. So I've been lucky enough to do that, or to be doing that. It's wrapping up in about a month, and it's just been an amazing experience. And when I went in the fall, back in September, I was thinking, I was a little bit guilty, thinking, oh gosh, it's like we're going into this crazy election time. God forbid Trump gets elected. Here I'm going to be, in the ivory tower. Is that kind of a cop out to be there while, I'm not cartooning every day and, cranking out animation. And, lo and behold, as after Trump gets elected, as everybody knows, one of the first targets has been academia. And so, it's like some of the number one targets are, immigrants and academia. It's like J.D. Vance said at this conservative conference, he literally said, we have to attack the universities. And sure enough, they're attacking the universities. And it had been a long time since I've been on a college campus, particularly, a place like Stanford, very international, as you might imagine, as a lot of people know. A lot of the top universities are very international. So it's like a double hit, as we've seen. It's like, it's scooping up people off the streets of Boston, and, just these little demonstrations of power and autocratic, creepiness. Like really like picking up people, when you're dressed in plain clothes, and like, come on. It's like, it's like scenes out of another country, out of an autocracy. And so, and I think that's intentional, these little scenes, and they publicize them. Like when the judge in Wisconsin was frog marched off the courthouse steps, they were right there with that photo and shared it proudly. So it's, anyway, I digress. So what I've been doing was trying to hide, but it didn't work. But anyway, so I've been studying, the main thing that I have been looking into was visual satire. Essentially, how can you, keep visual satire alive and healthy, but how can you amplify its positive effects on democracy and our society? And that's a tricky question. It's a very tricky question right now, especially from a perch at a university. So that's one of the things that I'm, doubly committed to amid this administrative mayhem going on at the federal level, and also just really trying to be effective in the work that I'm doing and figure out new and different ways to do it.
Very cool. And by the way, as I read about lessons in resistance from other parts of the world, the idea that critics take time to recharge, come up with new ideas, and gather strength so that they can fight seems like a key lesson. So good on you for taking the time to do that at a great campus.
It's amazing because it's been incredible for me, and I feel like, wow, I've been so lucky to get this fellowship, and it's been so life-changing already. But one of the most amazing parts about it is that so there's 13 in our cohort in this fellowship. More than half is international, and a good number of the people that are coming from foreign countries are coming from places that have been through the ringer, and that are, where democracy, if it does exist, is at risk, and where journalism is at serious risk. At least 3 of the people that are in the program have been arrested for their work and thrown in jail, and a handful of them have had to flee. So there's people in the program that have fled, and it's very interesting to talk to them. These are friends from countries like Russia, Venezuela, Malawi, Malaysia. It's very interesting to talk with them. It's chilling, really, to hear them say, "Oh yeah, we've seen this. Like, we've seen this. It started this way, and then this happens." It's hard to measure that impact, but one of the things that makes me realize there is impact is that cartoonists are one of the first ones they go after in some of these autocratic regimes, judging by, some of the experiences of my friends.
Well, let's hope that when you and I travel to El Salvador, we'll be doing it out of choice to go surfing rather than being thrown into CCOT.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I would love that. Surfing would be much more fun.
Before we leave the Stanford experience, you've gotten the chance, you told me, to look at AI and how AI applies to the work of political cartooning. AI, friend or foe?
It can be a terrible foe, and I'm trying to make it a good friend. about that for the short version of the answer. But yeah, it's AI. I mean, I'm trying to take it fairly agnostically at first. It's like there's awful issues around copyright, and they've been vacuuming up all kinds of copyrighted material and work that actual humans have done and worked very hard at doing, and it can be a huge threat to cartoonists and photographers and writers and any number of people, journalists. It's like there's all kinds of awful elements, but it's not just monolithic. It's not just AI. It depends on the company. I want to be able to use this as a tool for my work. That was one of the things that I was hoping to do when I went into this program at Stanford. I was thinking, that's kind of a hub for a lot of this. That's where a lot of that research is coming out of. And so I started reaching out to, various students and, people that are doing that research down at Stanford. And there's some amazing work that's going on. And so I talked to this one student down there who's just a brilliant mind in computer science and AI. Asked him, I was like, well, do you think we could make something that is trained only on my work? And, I have this huge library of work that we can feed it. Can we do that? Control it. I mean, that's key. Control it and then make it so it can spit out work like mine. Because it's not that I don't ever want to draw or cartoon again. It's that I want to be able to, not sit at the computer for hours on end, because it's, as everybody knows, animation is a tedious process. And I don't have a studio of, people that are doing my work or, mimicking my style. I mean, so far working on a AI generator that basically is trained in my style. So you can type in a text prompt and so far it can create a background. So we're on stills right now. Next step is to do characters, like simply animated, like ones in the background that are, blinking or subtly moving. And then, sky's the limit, depending on how far we go with it or how much budget there is.
So it sounds like on one hand, you're interested in inviting and sort of harnessing the power of AI to create a virtual studio of 20 junior Mark Fiores, illustrators, animators, cartoonists who make you that much faster, that much responsive, who occasionally get you to scratch your chin and say, I haven't thought of it that way. And on the other hand, you're trying to prevent me from enlisting a studio of Mark Fiores to create a cartoon under your name that's not yours.
Yes, exactly. And that's the conundrum.
Totally. And it strikes me that what you're trying to do is democratize the very craft of political commentary, cartooning, and satire so that more people can harness that at a time where we're really going to need it.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of, that leads into like the deeper psychology of this. It's like, okay, this is a production tool, but why do we need to turn stuff around so fast? Why can't we have true craft? Like, why can't I draw on paper and take my time and make it beautiful and artistic and all of that? And so the reason is, particularly for someone like me in the world of politics, is that we're facing this flood of misinformation and disinformation, obviously, that's just not slowing down and keeps getting thrown at us. So one of the other things that I was studying at Stanford that I've been diving into is the whole world of misinformation research and disinformation research, which now, after Trump's executive order, and that's become a dirty word. There was the Stanford Internet Observatory that was really studying that, and they were basically highlighting instances of election disinformation. And then along comes Jim Jordan and right-wing Republicans pointing at Stanford and this particular group as being a group of propaganda from the Biden government, or like, their censorship, suddenly pointing out lies becomes censorship. So, truth becomes lies, up becomes down. And so that whole world is turned upside down, and they're trying to keep turning it upside down. Suddenly it's an amazing thing that the US growth is now negative. That's a good sign. That means our economy is doing the right thing. It's like we're entering this world of Animal Farm. Anyway, so one of the things that I discovered is that there's there's this whole world of misinformation and disinformation research. One of the best ways to counter that that they've hit on is what they call inoculating, treating misinformation and disinformation and lies as a virus that we can combat through inoculating. So rather than going in after the fact, or like let it, kind of humoring it, and be like, haha, that's not true. We're gonna, just ignore it and it'll go away. It's like, no, you got to jump on that right away before it spreads. Like the story about the, Haitian immigrants in Ohio, that was a complete lie, eating pets, whatever. It's like that started in the right-wing fever swamp. And so the idea is like you go in and you tell people, hey, you might hear pretty soon, you might hear people lying about these immigrants in Ohio. This is complete BS because X, Y, and Z. So it's because nobody wants to be lied to. Nobody wants to be, have one pulled over on them, whether you're left, right, center, wherever. So that's been proven, there's like many, many studies about this and, lots of psychological research and, peer-reviewed studies and journal reports that this is a very effective way to push back against lies and disinformation. And so anyway, so that really lit a fire under me to be able to turn stuff around faster because, my normal schedule of animation, which was already pretty fast, this is a version of what I've been doing all along, trying to push back against hypocrisy and BS and lies. And so it's, it's still, even though there might be these cool psychological bells and whistles that I talk about, it still comes down to telling the story effectively and doing journalism or storytelling in a effective way.
Yeah, but we need to be able to inject truth into the discussion, or at least inject logic and reason so that people don't start swallowing bleach as President Trump then recommended.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's the old saying, lies halfway around the world before truth has its boots on, that old saying.
You've mentioned a bunch of things, Mark, but what are the threats to democracy that worry you most right now?
That worry me most right now is it's the threats against, closer to home, threats against journalism, media, and then probably more worrisome are the threats against the judiciary. Seeing a judge in handcuffs, getting paraded down the courthouse steps, like that's freaking scary. And like, from what I hear, and I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but from what I hear, it maybe there is a question about what she did, but it was clearly an intent to show her frog march down the steps. And then in the Solicitor General office, it's like you start to see the Trumpists coming in and the people who've been there for years and years going out. Trump and his crew, they've got the executive, Congress is, that's basically theirs too right now for the most part. And if this seeps into the judiciary, like it clearly has, it's clearly seeped into the Supreme Court. It's like, already we've seen real weakness in this whole, three branches of government, separation of powers that we grew up with. You're like, a lot of that is, there's paper and, judges write cool things and it's the law and all that. But at some point, it's like, what do you do if Trump and his crew just say like, no, it's like, what do you do? It's like, the another old saying, it's like, the judges, like their rulings are nice, but like, they don't have cops, it's like, it's this separation, which is such a great part of our system. But this is the first time, definitely the first time in my lifetime, but it's a real, kind of sounds cliche, but it's like a serious stress test. It's like we are suddenly realizing like, oh, maybe this three branches of government thing is kind of weak and based on a certain amount of being genteel and, being, proud about being American and not really pushing it to the full envelope. And now we have Trump and a whole bunch of people who are willing to push it as far as they possibly can. And if you call them on it, they'll push it even farther.
Yeah, this narrative that we're at risk of a constitutional crisis strikes me as being really timid. We are in a constitutional crisis, and yes, you could sort of say a big country, a big system like ours can bend before it breaks, but there's breaking is happening all around us, and the question is what to do about it. And I find myself kind of sympathetic with the forceful language of someone like J.B. Pritzker, who's saying we have to stand up to this at every opportunity, otherwise we're going to lose the country we recognize.
And if we don't lose it, we're doing so much long-term damage already.
Do you see any signs, rightly so, people who care about this country and our traditions are in a place of resistance and defense right now. Do you see anyone going on offense, kind of trying to get out in front of a scary but highly effective, perhaps more scary, a highly effective Trump administration, and trying to get out in front of the way that they're kind of leading us by the noses through the destruction of our constitutional order?
We're hearing a lot about what Harvard did, and that was very encouraging to just, stand up and say like, no. And I think some of these other law firms pushing back, we saw what happened to some of those law firms that, tried to make deals with Trump. And it's the give a mouse a cookie. Remember the give a mouse a cookie book. And it's like, you give him a cookie and, it's like, okay, yeah, leave me alone. Here's half a cookie. We're good now, right? And it's like, no, he's going to come back and keep asking you and asking you and asking you and picking you down. It's like, just look at how Trump has handled people that are supposedly his friends, let alone law firms that agree to stuff like that. So I think you have to say like, no, because he isn't, they are buffoons and idiots, and yes, they do have levers of power, but the country's not gone yet. It's like we do have these abilities to stand up to them. So that gave me hope. Seeing the pushback from various quarters, and seeing people like, AOC and Bernie, of course, it's like you see that out there. That's great. That's encouraging, and they're getting good crowds and doing a good job. We need that. But I think we need people to not roll over preemptively, and it was and that's already started to back off a little bit, luckily. But I was amazed at it seemed like it was at its peak when the law firms were beginning to roll over preemptively, and they're like, all right, okay, we're going to be good. And then seeing what Columbia did, it's like, yeah, you gotta. There are moments of hope out there, but it's just so apparent you can't negotiate with this guy.
You're obviously someone who has benefited from free speech, right? That is the background of all your work. But you've also been an advocate for it. And I want to zoom in on an experience in your past, because you're no stranger to confronting powerful people who tried to curtail your speech. Could you tell the story about you and Steve Jobs?
Oh, that one. So this was soon after I won the Pulitzer Prize a while back, and before I won the Pulitzer, this was in the early days of the iPad and the news organizations going on the the App Store, and it was God, that seems like so long ago now, and so much has changed on the business side and the political side, but there are definite similarities about what's going on now. Anyway, I created an app, and at that time, I was creating a weekly political animation, would put it out there, and then it went on this app, and we put in for a spot on the App Store, and we got rejected. And I read the rejection letter, and it said something like, you violated the terms and conditions, therefore we reject you. And then the terms and conditions you violate are that you ridicule public figures, and you are grouped in the same category as pornography and defamation. And then along comes the Pulitzer Prize and, more notoriety and news stories and all that fun stuff. And this journalist named Laura McGann with Neiman Reports out of Harvard, interestingly enough, she was interviewing me about this because it was a little bit of an added interest, because I was the first animated cartoonist, someone who was exclusively doing animated political cartoons that won the prize. And so she asked me, she's like, well, what do you think about the future of journalism on the App Store? Because it was such a buzz. And, do you think the iPad's going to help save journalism? And I said, well, not really, because, they don't allow political content on their App Store. And she's like, what? That was news to her as well. Anyway, so that suddenly became the big story. And it was very embarrassing for Apple at the time, because that became the story, not my Pulitzer, but that obviously was the beginning of it. And like now the story became like, he can win a Pulitzer, but he can't get on the App Store. And so it was, in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, it was everywhere. And then there was what was it? It was All Things D. It was Kara Swisher and those guys were interviewing Steve Jobs, and they asked him about it. And, they said, well, what's the story about this? Anyway, Steve Jobs kind of threw me under the bus and like, he was hassling me because he's like, well, we rejected him and he never applied again. And like and the problem is that it defamed political. So anyway, there's video of him, kind of calling me a liar, essentially, which is funny because like, I use Apple products and I thought Steve Jobs was kind of cool, the stuff that he put together, but he really was not into that. Anyway, I get this kind of deep throat type call from Apple saying, you might want to resubmit your app. And so I told the guy who had developed the app that, and he's like, wait, Apple called you? Apple doesn't call people. This is crazy. I was like, yeah, you just called and they said, so let me know. And so we resubmitted without changing anything at all. And so I called them, and then I hear like this 2 keystroke click on the other end of the line, and like, okay, you're in. So then it became, yeah, you're in. But then it kind of annoyed me because like I had to go through all that. It was like my 15 minutes of fame. And what about everybody else who comes behind me and wants to create political content? So I wanted to make sure that they did change their terms and conditions, which they eventually did. So, clearly now you can have apps that are about news and politics and, satire and all of that thing. So,
Mark, what's your take on the idea that the West Coast might be better off going on its own, if not fully, partly?
I mean, didn't California just bump up above Japan? The last I heard, I think we're number 4 in the, world economy. It would just make me sad. I mean, I'm not ready to advocate that, but I feel, I have some serious Pacific time pride, let's call it. I feel like that could happen. I hope it doesn't, because to me, I don't think that would necessarily be like at least in this day and age, it doesn't seem like that would just be a peaceful, happy, like, see you later kind of thing. A little too much of a Handmaid's Tale and, the breaking off of the country in that way. I would rather not. I don't want to have to go through customs to go, to Idaho, let's say. But it's an interesting idea. And I feel like we have the power. And I feel like mentally it's kind of happened in some ways already. I'd be interested to hear what you thought about that. Like, are we already partway there? This whole idea of, the left coast, it's like, we're kind of already a good way there. I still like the concept of the United States, and I fly a U.S. flag, even though people probably think it's Trumpy now. It's like I have this idea of I don't want the assholes to take patriotism. I don't want them to take the flag, and I definitely don't want them to take that part of the country.
Yeah, and by the way, when you add in Washington and Oregon, the West Coast becomes the 3rd largest economy behind the rest of the U.S. and China. That's it.
Good point. And then who knows what would happen? Let's game this out a little bit. Let's say then we are, and okay, what's left of the United States, just imagining it, what was the name of I'm blanking on the name of the country in Handmaid's Tale, Gilead. So like, let's say Gilead becomes, more Trumpy and less investment in academics, less investment in education, and they become more like, yeah, we'll build our iPhones here, let's get all the kids screwing in the screws, and we're going to go big with coal. So like, what would that do to their economy? So we might rise up even more. Let's say we're the new country, the state of Pacific time or whatever we call it. We would progress and they would go downhill potentially. So maybe we'd rise up from 3. I mean, sadly, I would consider like, troops and like actual fighting. I mean, and maybe that's just where my head is now. I feel like there'd be a way, and let me see if I can do it. Like there might be a way to think that more in a utopian sort of way rather than a civil war sort of way, but I'm having a really hard time picturing that right now.
My joke has been that certainly Donald Trump has negotiated divorces before.
It's very true.
Could this be a national divorce? But yeah, nobody's cheering for another civil war. Not at all.
Definitely not.
If you were going to create cartoons about the idea of West Coast independence or functional autonomy, what would you draw?
Oh, definitely lots of bears. That's the first thing that popped in my head. But that's probably California centric. So then I might piss off Washington and Oregon. But I mean, my first thought is bears. But then I think you had mentioned at some point, what would be the representative animal or cartoon? And I mean, really one of the ones that I would think of first would be the gray whale, because they're migrating all up and down. They connect every state, every state would see them migrating by. So I think the most unifying representation, as if we're thinking of animals, just because that's where my brain goes visually as a cartoonist, I would think of something like a gray whale. But maybe there is I'm sure there's migrating birds, but to me, I don't know, a whale is just cooler. That would be the first place I would go. But there's, then you have mountains and there is a commonality in scenery, particularly if you get up towards Northern California, like, kind of merges into Oregon and then Oregon merges into Washington. It's like everything just gets bigger the farther north you go.
What else might you play with if you were drawing a flag for the Pacific states of America?
Oh, you would definitely have some water in there, or at least a representation of water. I mean, I wish we had a whiteboard or something. We could start playing around with it. But, I foresee like, you'd have a blue band maybe down below for the water, so you'd have blue, green, and then, I don't know, maybe a little whale in the middle, something like that. Depends on how realistic you would want it to go, because you could always have the water, be slightly wavy. I don't know. I'd need to look at like the state flag of Rhode Island or like some, Caribbean islands, nations or something to see how they do it. But yeah, I would picture, water, green, mountains, a whale or some unifying animal or creature in there somehow.
Let me ask you this. If cartoonists like you were to draw up a constitution, either a new one for the United States or for the Pacific states, what would it have to include?
Well, I think one of the things that first we would have to have a really great constitutional convention, and, hopefully it would involve, I don't know, maybe barbecue, by the ocean and, something.
Microbrew.
Yeah. Something, it'd have to be something very, Cascadia or West Coast style. But more seriously, I would think, what we talked about earlier with the separation of powers. Is there a way to codify some of the gentlemen's agreements that we've seen, like some of the weaknesses we're seeing in our Constitution now? If you really get, a zealot or an autocrat into power, how do you guard against that? I would definitely want to look at that a little more in depth and, probably clarify some stuff and, and roll some of those amendments into the actual Constitution. We would, hopefully roll some of the, some of the voting things and get rid of the slavery parts of the Constitution, or the parts that had to get rid of that, because we luckily would not have to get rid of that right now.
Yeah, it strikes me that two good things that could come out of this Trump era. One is kind of a reinvigoration of participatory democracy, just seeing the people marching and getting involved with their congressional meetings in their districts, I think is a really good sign. And also if it inspires a constitutional cleanup, either at the United States level or the state level, that could be really great too.
Yeah. I mean, we saw some of that in the last go round, after the whole battle over the election, it's like some of that was like, oh, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't turn everything over to them. And, maybe we do need a few more of these guardrails that are in there that are actually written down and more specified.
Mark, any advice for young artists and critics about how to make a difference without burning out?
Oh, without burning out. That's key. And I think this applies to really everybody now who's paying attention and who is, whether you're going to marches or, organizing or, doing something to prevent our nation from, slipping into somewhere where we really don't want to be under this Trumpist autocrat. I think the number one thing is to look at this as more of a marathon than a sprint. You have to be able to, and this is, I do this myself to keep from going crazy, being immersed in so much, awfulness, and this is even before Trump. I would try and do this, because a lot of what I do as a cartoonist is wade through bad news. You wade through, most of the news is often bad news. Like, yeah, there's uplifting stories and that's important and that's great, but I'm not going to be doing cartoons about, isn't it wonderful that this great thing happened? That's someone else's job. That's a different role. And that's not needed for me to do that. But it really takes a toll on you to always be reading through difficult stuff. And that now is not just me, but that's everybody. You look at what Doge is doing and what's happening in the current administration, and that's overwhelming. And it's really easy to just gorge on that, doom scroll, gorge on this thing. And then you're like, oh God, I need to get away from this. And then it's easier suddenly to just turn it off. And that's largely what they want, and that's what some of the friends that I was talking about earlier who've come from repressive regimes, they like it when people tune out, so let's not tune out. So what I do to avoid that burnout or tune out is take little breaks, whether it's a day or 2 days, like it's okay to turn it off. And it's important to turn it off, like go do something else, go for a hike, go for a bike ride, or whatever it is that you do, or go, volunteer at a food bank or something like that. Like go do things that fill your cup and ideally fill other people's cup. But it's okay to shut this stuff off because you want to be refreshed and be able to turn it back on. And it also makes you realize what the value is. Like, what are you fighting for? And what are you reading all this awfulness for? Like, are you just reading it to like get this weird little dopamine hit and this little aggressive anger? You don't want to do it for that. You want to do it because you value the good things, like where we live and what we can do. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but in this great country, like I love this place and I don't want it to be destroyed. And so you do want to be able to give yourself breaks and do what you need to do in doses, and that'll keep you from burning out, hopefully.
That was Mark Fiore, cartoonist, commentator, and defender of democracy, one pen stroke at a time. If you're feeling like the world's gone off the rails, maybe Mark's right. It's time to treat this as a marathon, not a sprint. Draw a breath, then draw something subversive. You can find his work at markfiore.com and keep an eye out for his next ventures in AI-assisted satire. For more conversations like this, subscribe to Pacific Time wherever you get your podcasts, and if you liked what you heard, draw us a 5-star review, or better yet, share it with someone who thinks cartoons can change the world. Thanks for being with me in Pacific Time. Let's keep asking the what-if questions about the future of the West Coast. See you next time.